Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brief history of art in Japan.
Yes, glad to have everyone. Art in Japan can be traced back to the 10th century BC. The earliest people to settle on the Japanese islands created art in various forms. Japanese art has been heavily influenced over the centuries by war. Invaders introduced new artistic techniques and styles. Historically, the Japanese also borrowed heavily from the Chinese.
Very true, Ryan. However, as Japanese art evolved, it developed its own style and traditions too. Japanese art covers a broad spectrum with mediums and types that include paintings, origami, woodblock prints, literature, pottery, sculpture, calligraphy, and manga.
So, the first era in Japanese art history we have is the Muromachi period, which takes its name from the Kyoto district in which the Ashikaga shogunate maintained its headquarters. During this time, also, Zen Buddhism rose to prominence in Japan. Zen temples often featured gardens of the Karansui type, which facilitated meditation overall. Overall, these paintings display great variety in subject and style. Another style that developed in the Muromachi period is Shigajiku. This is usually a painted accompanied by poetry and its roots in China, where painting and poetry were seen as inherently connected. This style grew out of literary circles. An artist would usually be given a subject to paint, and the poets would compose accompanying verses to be written above the work.
The next era in the history of the art in Japan is the Momoyama period, which takes its name from Momoyama Peach Blossom Hill, one of the warlords during this period. A recurrence is the prevalent warlords. In particular, three successive warlords dominated this brief but artistically rich interlude between two long-lasting shogunates. Many of the finest works of this period were commissions from these warlords, including Chinese lines by Kano Itoku, a six-part folding screen featuring animals considered to be symbols of power and bravery. We also see for the first time the Japanese tea ceremony become a social ritual for Japan. The tea master Sen no Rikyu designed the first tea house built as an independent structure. The favorite tea utensils were rustic waves from the Mino kilns.
Okay, and next in periods is the Edo period, which began when the shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu moved his headquarters from Kyoto to Edo, otherwise known as modern Tokyo. The Katsura Imperial Villa, which relies for its aesthetic appeal on subtleties of proportion, color, and texture instead of ornamentation, set the standard for later Japanese domestic architecture, and the Rinpa school, named for Ogata Koren, emerged as a major alternative school of paintings to the Kano school, which had which had become a virtual national art academy. Rinpa paintings and crafts feature vivid colors and extensive use of gold, as in the boat bridge writing box by Ho Han Emi Koetsu. Growing urbanization in major Japanese cities fostered a lively popular culture focused on sensual pleasure and theatrical entertainment. The best known products of this sophisticated counterculture are the ukiyo-e woodblock prints of Ito's Floating World by Suzuki Harunobu and others. The prints features scenes from brothels and the theater, as well as beautiful women in domestic settings.
Lastly, in the periods of Japan, there is Meiji and Showa. The Tokugawa shogunate toppled in 1868, opening the modern era of Japanese history. Western styles and techniques had a great influence, and many Japanese artists, including Takahashi Yuichi, incorporated shading and perspective in their works, and even produced oil paintings. In the post-World War II period, many Japanese artists and architects achieved worldwide reputations. Kenzo Tange was a master of creating dramatic shapes using a cable suspended system for his concrete and steel buildings. Kazuo Shiraga played a seminal role in the development of performance art as a major modern genre. Okay, so now there are a few definitions that you should be familiar with. In Japanese architecture, fusuma are vertical rectangular panels which can slide from side to side to redefine spaces within a room or act as doors. They typically measure about 3 foot wide by 5 foot 11 inches tall, the same size as a tatami mat, and are 2 to 3 centimeters thick. The religion that Japan's art revolved around was Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism teaches that all human beings have the Buddha nature, or the potential to attain enlightenment, within them, but the Buddha nature has been clouded by ignorance.
Shinoware is Japanese pottery, usually stoneware, originally from Mino province in present-day Gifu Prefecture, Japan. It emerged in the 16th century, but the use of Shino glaze is now widespread both in Japan and abroad.
The Japanese rock garden, Karasansui, or dry landscape garden, was often called a Zen garden. It created a miniature stylized landscape through carefully composed arrangements of rocks, water features, moss, prune trees, and bushes. Now, a shogunate was essentially a form of government in which the ruler is an absolute dictator, which is not restricted by a constitution or laws or oppositions, etc.
So now we're going to transition into some art. Our first piece of art is the evening bell at the clock pictured here, an exquisite piece created by Suzuki Harunobu.
Absolutely, a very fine piece with origins that trace back to the Edo period. You can see the influence instantly from Beijing, denoted as refined beauty, in the piece right off the gate.
In it is a young woman who has just taken her bath and sits draped on a veranda. Her servant, who is rubbing her back, turns toward the clock as it chimes.
Harunobu was a key artist during this period as he was the first to have his art published in full color on a commercial scale.
Motonobu's Zen patriarch, Xingsheng Seisheng, sweeping with the broom, depicts the monk experience the moment of enlightenment. The work incorporates features of Chinese academic modes of ink painting. Motonobu's picture was one of a set of sliding doors for a Zen temple. The Zen patriarch with the broom depicts a scene from the spiritual life of a Zen patriarch. In this painting, the monk experiences the moment of enlightenment. Such a growing architectural decoration formed a growing component repertoire of the Kano school and later arrivals.
Next, we have the Great Wave of Kanagawa, painted by Katsuhiko Hokusa.
This is a piece with immaculate detail in every aspect. It is a breathtaking composition of woodblock print.
Very good point, Devin. We can see an unequivocal inspiration from Debussy's La Mer, The Sea, and Rilke's Der Berg.
Hokusai cleverly played with perspective to make Japan's grandest mountain appear as a small triangular mound within the hollow of the cresting wave. Further, he became renowned for his landscapes created using a palette of indigo and imported Prussian blue.
Hiroshige brings us face to face with the celebrated sleeping dragon plum of Kaimaido. This tree, the most famous in Edo, was known for the purity of its double blossoms.
And according to one Edo guidebook, were so white when full in bloom as to drive off the darkness. We are so close that we can almost smell the tree's powerful fragrance, reputed to have lured the shogun Yoshimune as he passed nearby in the early 18th century.
The tree is shown with a unique abstract composition, with wide branches taking up much of the foreground but cropped by the frame of the picture, giving a resemblance to Japanese calligraphy. Oil painting became a major genre in Japan in the late 19th century. Ambitious students studied with Westerners at government schools and during trips abroad. One oil painting highlighting the cultural ferment of the early Meiji period is Oiron, painted by Takayashi Yuichi, who opened a school to teach young Japanese artists how to paint in the Western manner.
Certainly, he asked the artist to make an accurate record of a geisha who still wore her hair in the distinctive out-of-fashion Japanese style. In the painting, however, Takahashi did not portray the courtesan's features in the idealizing manner of ukiyo-e artists, but in the more analytical manner of Western portraiture. and in accord with the portrait's purpose, meticulously reproduced the geisha's hairpin-filled coiffure.
Yet the painter's more abstract rendering of the garments reflects a very old practice in East Asian portraiture. The subject and abstract rendering of this courtesan's garment derive from ukiyo-e and traditional Japanese art, but the oil technique and the meticulous recording of the coiffure follow Western norms.
This monumental painting represents Kannon in the guise of the Bodhisattva, enlightened being, associated with infinite compassion, portrays the Buddhist deity who nurtures an infant surrounded by a halo.
Both figures hover among clouds high above the stark landscape of the world where the child will live. The painting exhibits a signature and seal.